At 4ZZZ, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we broadcast. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the Turrbal and Jagera people. We acknowledge that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded.
And we stand in solidarity with them.
You're listening to Transmission on 4ZZZ, amplifying the trans and gender non-conforming voices of Brisbane and beyond.
Hello, good morning, Meanjin. You're listening to Transmission on 4ZZZ. My name is Ez, I use he, him pronouns, and it's all about amplifying the voices of the trans community of Brisbane and beyond, and filling you in on events, news. We have discussions. We've got a discussion lined up today. The dear, wonderful, incredible Marisa, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a nice gloomy day too. It's like kind of moody.
Yeah. I like them. I like it like that.
Although the UV is very high, so please remember, just because it's overcast doesn't mean you can't get burnt. So, yeah, Queensland has the highest skin cancer rates in the world. Slip, slop, slap, damn it.
Keep your hat on.
Yeah, leave your hat on. Definitely. Anyway, other than a health conscious update and community announcement there, some other community events that are going on around town. I actually only have one that I'm going to mention today, and it starts up in the new year. Lord Sev, also co-host of Transmission, starting in January, every Sunday afternoon, RPGs for the LGBTs at the Wickham. No experience necessary and all levels of experience welcome, offering a selection of RPGs from Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade to indie games including Thirsty Sword Lesbians and Chuck Tingle's Tingleverse. There'll also be spaces for Magic and Gathering, other board games, and a table for miniature painting. Plenty of space for you to do your own thing. You can even bring your own established game group in and set up your own table, just to bask in the beauty and adventuring prowess of your queer peers and indulge in the Quest Tavern's fantasy-themed food offerings. Ooh, it's a completely free event. It's going to be every Sunday from the 7th of January onwards at 2 p.m. So it's pretty great time slot, I think, Sunday afternoon for some RPGs. Very casual and totally free. Great way to meet people and stay connected to the community, the queer community. All you queer nerds, myself included. It's great. Go do some role-playing stuff. Have some fun. That's starting up in the new year. Also, just a little community notice. If you are a queer person or a trans person that's creating an event or putting on something out in town, I implore you to let me know. Tell me about it. I would like to let the community know that listens to 4ZZZ as well as Transmission about your event. But also, if you are not a trans person or within the trans community and you're putting on an event that is somehow centering and or maybe adjacent catering to the trans community and trying to be all-inclusive, please remember the language that you use. And if you are confused about how you address or how you let the community know, the trans community know that you are a safe venue, you need to tell us how you're making it safe, because you are not a trans person yourself. So how are you doing that? Where are you getting your information from? And also, have trans people involved with the actual running of the event on the day, so that way we can see that it is safe, because there are community members there. There's some event going around at the moment that I'm still looking into that has some really questionable language, which is making me a bit concerned about the safety for our community at this particular event. So my concern is that the language is really confusing, and when asked about clarification on this particular thing, my messages were just deleted and no response, which is a huge alarm bell for me. So I'm going to do a bit more research into that, and I'll get back to you on this event. But yeah, look out for one another, and if you're ever confused about whether an event is safe, directly ask that event organizer or that venue, hey, what the heck is this about? Am I safe to attend? Because we do actually have to think about that every time. If you're an ally or a cis person listening, trans people are constantly thinking about, am I going to be safe when I walk out the front door? So if you're hosting an event, please consider the safety of the trans people that are in that space. Yeah, just thought I would let you know. Anyway, moving on, Marissa and I, we're going to have a really interesting chat about how we can look after the community further, really, basically. Yeah, so stay tuned. You're listening to Transmission on 4ZZZ. My name is Ez, and I use he, him pronouns.
Yeah, my name is Marisa, and I use they, them pronouns.
I just did the double finger gun, and you go.
Yeah.
And you're like, ah.
I got the signal.
All right, you're listening to Transmission, all about amplifying the voices of the trans community and beyond. And today, Marissa and I hanging out in studio, and we're going to be talking about internal conflicts and resolutions. How to, overcome sometimes really challenging community situations or organization situations where there's maybe a public call out, and we'll use the framework of public call out to sort of use as an example as we navigate how we resolve conflict and move and grow and reform and transform together.
Yeah, I suppose community conflicts and oppressive behaviors of many kinds they're a part of every community. Doesn't matter what community you're a part of, but yeah, I think we could probably do a bit better as a community in general with our responses to the inevitable problems that come with being in community, and especially having all different kinds of people with all different life experiences. And
abilities and capacities as well. I think it's also probably really tricky in communities like the trans community who are naturally, I think, very defensive. Because we are under attack, right? So we're sort of very rigid, and we can be on attack and on defense just as a default standby mode.
Yeah, absolutely. All your survival mechanisms can really play themselves out when a conflict happens or a discord of some kind. And yeah, I mean, it's totally to be expected, nothing to be ashamed of at all. But I think sometimes, when we're in survival mode, some of our higher order thinking is a bit switched off. We can make decisions that aren't safe for ourselves or other people, it's just a very reactive state, basically. So I'm interested in what the community conditions would look like that support you as someone who's had something, awful or triggering happen to you, and then also, support the conditions for accountability for the person who's caused this to happen as well.
And instead of resulting in, this whole cancel culture, which is what happens, oh, you did a bad thing? Oh, well, goodbye. That's it. You're no longer relevant. No chance to reform, no chance to grow, no chance to apologize necessarily,
To repair,
and heal the damage done. So yeah, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get into it.
We've opened up a big can of worms already.
And this is, these are conversations that aren't really had within the trans community that often. Maybe not, definitely not on the radio. So this is exciting. So let's talk about a public call out as an example of maybe a form of a conflict, a breakdown of communication.
So I think normally it's something's happened, maybe an organizer in community has done something that's oppressive or said something or organized something badly or unsafely, and I'd also like to say that often I think the public call out happens because we don't see that there are other options available, just because we don't have a culture of utilizing those other options. So we might not even know. And we also might not have a sort of accountability-oriented culture around us to support us when something happens to us. So part of the work is building that culture so that maybe the call-out is potentially just used more strategically or doesn't happen at all. But it's sort of done mindfully.
Do you think that so with a public call out, obviously it's public, right? And that can come with can feel a bit like an attack, especially for an organization. Whether they've done something not great or not is irrelevant. A public call out is still would feel like an attack.
Yeah, I would say it's a use of power. So when something's happened to you that's really, really bad, uncomfortable, triggering, you often you feel very powerless, and that's totally normal. But in feeling powerless, you're often still using power. So you might be telling other people, you might be shrinking and looking after yourself, protecting yourself. You might be doing a public call out, which is a big exercise of power. And I would say that power is not a dirty word. It's really good. And sometimes harm needs to be intervened in very powerful ways. But yeah, just knowing that we're using it is really important. I think it's really important for being ethically mindful, and so if we don't even perceive that we're doing it, that's already a bit of a space where that thoughtfulness isn't there.
Yeah, and I guess when something happens, maybe you've gone to an event or something, and for example, I'll use one of my experiences as an example, actually. I went to a gig. This had nothing to do with the venue, absolutely nothing to do with the band or anything like that. I was there. A lesbian person who used to know me from before I transitioned saw me at this venue and decided to confront me and call me a traitor and go off in my face and tell me that I didn't deserve to be in this space, and like went right at me, right? I actually had no idea who this person was. I couldn't remember them. I'm not entirely sure who they were, or maybe they didn't know who really I was. I don't know. Irrelevant. That wasn't really the point. I ended up feeling absolutely awful, and I removed myself from that space for a period of time. And so I felt targeted. I felt like I'd done something wrong, and simultaneously I felt completely exiled from a community that was mine for like a decade.
Yeah.
So there was like a lot of feelings going on there, and I guess like the conflict was that I felt like in that moment that I was wrong, and that I didn't deserve the space that I had once previously been in, and that I had betrayed that space, which was really awful. It was really awful at the time. I'm well and truly fine now. I know that I know who I am, and I'm sure that person had their reasons in their mind for what justified that behavior. Doesn't make it okay, doesn't make it good, and I don't think that any of what they were saying to me makes any logical sense, but we're not logical beings,
but
we're not. We're emotional beings.
I work as a therapist, and we talk about people's protective responses all the time. Like, often when someone's acting out in a way like that, it's actually a self-protective thing, even though it's being like projected over there. It's to protect them from their own pain often, and that's a generous reading that I like to keep in mind when these things happen. Yeah.
Is that people who lash out have something going on is always what I believe, not necessarily. Also, the other thing that we need to remember, especially when it comes to conflict and internal conflicts and how we resolve them, is that actions are not always reflections of that person in of themselves.
Yeah.
Behavior doesn't always correlate to how that person is inside all the time.
Yeah.
We're all complex, and we're all capable of really awful things to each other.
Yeah, awful things, and also of changing. So this thing that happens often, like, oh, they're now a transphobe, a racist. We kind of like label someone as this thing.
Now. Yeah.
But when we think of that person as just inherently being that, it's like, where's that person's capacity for change? Like, we can't see it as much, and then often, we create a binary around it, it's like, oh, they're the oppressive one, I'm the oppressed, they're the oppressor, I'm the oppressed. And, often from that like place of, maybe you're thinking about it a bit moralistically, you can justify like all sorts of uses of power towards them in return, because you think, I might be doing the right thing here, but people aren't inherently anything.
No.
People aren't inherently racist or transphobic or anything like that, but
it's a learned behavior.
It's a learned behavior. It's because we're all swimming in it, and that includes us too.
Yes.
Like we're all swimming in it, and we all internalize the system in different ways.
Yeah. And it's same like within the trans community, we have like very complex as we say, no trans person story is like another's. Everyone has a different transitional experience and understanding of gender within themselves and what gender means to them. Gender might mean nothing to them. Gender might mean everything to them. And that can change also. And so the way that it expresses on each other, the way that we put it on each other sometimes, and the way we need to hold space for each other can also be really challenging. And there can be conflicts. Sometimes someone might say something and use a word or a piece of language. And, like, one word for me, even a gesture. Kai and I, we were having a heated discussion the other day, and Kai rolled their eyes, and I was like, "Oh, what the heck does that mean?" And I perceived the eye roll as like, you think that I'm being silly, or like I felt patronized, and then Kai's like, "No, I'm rolling my eyes at like, oh, of course that's the thing," like rolling their eyes with, "Oh, I get it now." But I interpreted it totally differently, and I thought it was like some kind of attack.
Yeah.
So, we can misinterpret each other as well, and that's why being clear and asking for clarification with things. Earlier, I was talking about there's an event in town that if you don't know if it's safe, ask.
Yeah.
Trans people, we're pretty cluey at knowing when you're lying about a safe space. We know stuff. So, the language that people use and how we work with each other. Yeah.
And I think also it doesn't have to all be on you. If something's happened to you, I mean, often when we're in like survival mode, one of the narratives that accompanies it is, I have to deal with this myself. Like, I have to do something right now. And, like my question for you is like, what would it look like if something happened to you at this event, like in your story, and there were people around you who could support you and your well-being and make sure that you felt still welcome in the space whilst also working with the person who had shouted at you and had that big reaction.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't all on you.
Yeah, well, immediately after that incident, after I was yelled at, I decided to remove myself from the venue. And I could have very easily gone to a security guard and asked the security guard to have this person removed. But that's another form of conflict, another whole heap of people's navigating, and is it worth it? I was already hurt. What's best for me right now is to leave. And even if that person had been the one that was removed and I stayed, my night was kind of already ruined.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I'm going to like remove myself from this environment because I'll feel better. And that's a form of self-care and self-soothing after something.
I would say that's a use of power, like you were getting a need of yours met in the moment, and even though it wasn't, ideally what you wanted to do, you were still in some sense looking after yourself.
Well, I was exercising the power to leave.
The power to leave. It's a great power.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? I don't have to. I can leave here.
Quite funny how sometimes we don't even perceive that we have the power to leave, even when we do have the power to leave. I have that.
People
I can feel
also
very trapped often.
People feel trapped by politeness as well. Like, oh, if I leave right now, that's going to be rude, even though I don't want to be here. No, just leave. There's no one making you stay in spaces.
I'm sending that message to myself right now.
You can leave whenever you want.
Leave.
You just stand up and walk out of the studio. Like, Marisa,
bye, everyone.
Bye. Yeah. No, come back. We can restore this. Amplifying the voices of the trans and gender non-conforming community of Meanjin, Brisbane and beyond.
Transmission on 4ZZZ brings you the latest in trans community news, music and events.
Every Tuesday from 9am till 10am. Join
our team of hosts for an hour of celebrating the unique perspectives of the trans community.
Transmission, Tuesday mornings from 9am till 10am on 4ZZZ. You're listening to Transmission on 4ZZZ. My name is Ez. I use he, him pronouns.
And my name's Marisa. I use they, them pronouns.
And we're having a chat about internal conflicts and resolution within the community, which can be applied to all folk and communities, really.
Yeah. There's no communities without conflict. I think often the communities that ostensibly have no conflict are kind of culty, right?
Yeah, actually.
There's something going on there.
Hey, you guys seem all really happy. Yeah, we're so happy. We're too happy. We're eye-twitchingly happy.
Their eyes are a bit too wide, when they're looking at you.
Like, okay.
So conflict is normal. It happens. We're all swimming in oppressive systems that we absorb and then enact. And no one's outside of that. We're all swimming in the swimming pool together.
Oh god.
Sorry to say.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, and we were talking a bit about it was setting sort of the scene for internal conflicts and how conflicts work and how they can happen and all the nuances that come with behaviour, really. And Marisa, tell me.
Okay.
tell me. There's
well, you shared this example of, something that happened to you in an event. Somebody shouted at you in an event and was quite transphobic about it. And my question to you was like, okay, what would a healthy community around you look like so that you don't have to deal with that all on your own? You don't have to feel like it's all on you to have a response to fight the oppression that just happened, but you can do it in a really supported way. And so I guess, I'm keen to pull that out a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I think, this episode is a bit less addressed to the person who's just been harmed, but actually the people around. I want to address this to all the other people in the scenario. So, mutual friends, events organisers, community members.
I contacted the headliner band afterwards and I told them what happened and they made a post about how that behaviour is not on.
Yeah.
And I felt really validated in that moment. And that band was really great in saying, we don't condone transphobia and everyone in the community is welcome to our music, which was really nice.
Very important.
I didn't speak to the venue, but I had other community folk and I told people, I immediately told people what was happening because that's we talked about before, telling people is a form of power, being like, hey, look, this has happened. This is what's going on. Be mindful of it for yourself, but also help me.
Yeah.
Soothe me. Help me understand what's happened.
Yes, yes. Co-regulate with me. Sorry to use the therapy term.
No, good. I don't. Glad you're in the studio.
Sorry, I got all social worker on you. But yes, people who can help
even
you
the
feel better.
perpetrator of the things that she'd said and all of that, I don't condemn the person, I condemn the behavior. Right? And that person, in order for them to understand their behavior, needs to also have safety, friends, support network, maybe family or whatever, to understand that, hey, you did a pretty crappy thing, but you are not a crappy person.
Yeah, so we were talking before about what are the sort of community conditions needed for that person to change, and I would say one of the fundamental things needed is safety in your community relationships, because as soon as there's a sense of I'm going to be exiled, or people think I'm bad now, people think I'm wrong now, that all just that turns on your lizard brain. It turns off your higher order thinking. This is all backed up by neurology and all this stuff. But when we're in survival mode, I don't think genuine accountability can actually happen. And maybe best case scenario, they do a very apologetic post or something, but I don't know if that's really hit those deeper levels that it needs to and supported actual change. It might, ironically, that could be another trauma response to just oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And then, maybe that's just their habitual response to conflict. And, there's just because they've ostensibly said the right thing in a post doesn't mean that, that change has actually occurred. And maybe they're not feeling safe anymore either. So that's not an ideal scenario.
Because they can feel the attack can turn on them as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I did this bad thing. Crap. Now I could be the target.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And often it's this stuff is often peer to peer. Though we're not, often it's we've just publicly shamed someone who's also just a mentally ill queer, we haven't just publicly shamed a millionaire or a
a different kind of 1%er.
And we can feel there's a huge power disparity. Maybe they're an organizer in community, maybe they do have a lot of social capital within your community, but generally I'd say they're not rich and famous. They're also in the capitalist underclass with us.
And it may not even be, it could be someone that you regularly see in a community space, but you don't really know personally as well. Yeah. And maybe it's a community space can also be online Facebook groups and community groups online. People can post things that can trigger you, and that's why it's always good to write trigger warnings and stuff before writing and blurting stuff out sometimes, to give people the choice to tap in or out and how they can support you as someone who's also in that space.
Yeah. So if you're if you're a friend of Ez in that event, and Ez comes up to you and says, this horrible thing just happened to me, it's a good idea, I would say, to look at what your natural and habitual response to conflict is. So maybe it's to just be oh, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to know, or maybe it's to sort of fully take Ez's side, Ez, they're transphobic and stuff them, they can go, Let
me get my punk jacket on.
Maybe it's to do that. Or, you could be avoiding, you could be taking sides, you could be doing any number of things. And of course you need to have your ethical stance. I'm not saying don't have your ethical stance on what just happened, but, a lot of us are really conflict averse. I think Australian culture in general is really conflict averse.
Oh, yeah.
So it can feel easier to just go, oh, I'm going to go find a person in a position of authority to sort this out for me, or I'm going to just do a public call out on Facebook, or I'm going to do whatever, because conflict is really uncomfortable. It actually does, for a lot of us, switch on survival brain. So yeah, it's certainly not comfortable for me, but working on it has been very empowering, actually, because we can do difficult things and have difficult conversations, and people can still be in relationship with us even if we make mistakes. And it's one of the powerful things that somebody who's caused harm can learn, is that they can still do bad things and still be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And they can still, I don't know a single person, I've never met a single person that hasn't been oh, I did a stupid thing once.
Yeah, we've all done hurtful
I
and
did a
oppressive
stupid thing
things.
once, and
Yeah.
I every time I think about it, I wince, and like,
Yeah.
oh, why did I do that? But and that's a really good. If you're cringing at that experience
Yeah.
of the silly thing you did, that's good. You learnt from that mistake. You understand what you did and the harm that you may have caused, and that you can let it go. You can let it go. Don't keep holding on to it in your body,
Yeah,
Breathe it
and
out.
you can know, like, on a deep level, I still have worth as a human being, even if I did really
You
bad
do,
things.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say from that place is where genuine accountability comes from, actually. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if someone's just sinking into, like, I'm bad, I'm shameful, or if they're reacting like, nope, I did nothing wrong, nothing happened, extremely defensive, neither of those places are kind of places where accountability can emerge. And, we might not have a lot of control over that. We don't really have a lot of control over other people's reactions, but we can set the conditions to give them a better chance of having a reaction where, where they can be accountable for what happened and feel okay about it afterwards.
Yeah. I'm usually one of those people, if someone comes to me, hey, as this just happened, I'll be like, okay. And I might like take a minute to process, look at the immediate environment, go, is everyone safe in this moment to continue having a conversation? Do we need to remove ourselves from the space? And I usually ask the person, what would you like to do right now? Because
what are your needs right now?
The person who's been hurt or victimized or whatever, they're the persons, they need to come absolute paramount. Their needs are the first. And so normally, for me, maybe I'd be like, all right, that's it, let me roll up my sleeves, let's go sort someone out. There's a Nazi in the building, let's get him. Or there's been an issue, like there's been a breakup and it's been very public and embarrassing and it's in a venue or it's in a space. All right, what would make that person feel comfortable? What would you like to do right now? I'd like to leave. Okay, let's get out of here. Let's take a breath and just feel your feelings.
Yeah.
And it's not always the easiest thing to do either.
It's not. I had to learn how to do that as an adult, just saying.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With professional help.
Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. This
Ding,
is
ding,
going to
ding.
go get some help.
Yeah.
You don't have to do everything alone,
No, you don't have to. Yeah, and remember that there's lots of time. Like when we're in survival brain, it can feel very urgent. When we're feeling victimized, it can feel extremely urgent because our feelings are literally set up to tell us something's gone wrong and you need to do
and
something
you are
right
unsafe.
now. You are unsafe.
Yeah.
You need to get,
Bail.
you need to bail.
Jump ship.
So remember that there's lots of time, and actually, like, accountability takes time too.
It
For the other
does.
person.
It does.
It takes a lot of time. If you're expecting a public apology in 3 days,
Statement just comes out from a lawyer.
yeah,
that's not right.
It takes weeks, months,
But also,
maybe longer.
The other thing is too, when let's just say I called you a bad name. I don't know. It was a really awful name, right?
Yeah.
And you were like, ow, that really hurt me. And I'll be like, what? It's just a name. That's people do that. I'm like, no, just because that word doesn't hurt you doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt other people.
Yeah.
And it's on you to have patience for that person whether they want to engage with you again and when and how. And you have to take responsibility and go, yeah, you know what? I called you a mean thing. And you're right. You have every right to be hurt.
Yeah.
And I'm
You've
going
had
to
an
leave you alone,
impact.
and
Yeah.
you tell me when you're ready to re-engage, or if you want to re-engage.
I think what I really love about that example is that it's a small practice of accountability.
Very small.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think, like, as communities, we can really we can practice that. We can practice conflict with our friends, which is often safer than having to suddenly do it with people who are less
Role-play.
friendly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Oh
like
my gosh,
role play
role-play's
stuff,
amazing.
and they do a lot of, I think, I don't know, is that like kind of like exposure therapy when you work through something in a role playing setting?
Sounds like it.
And you sort of like, okay, let's reenact what happened and let's change the narrative. So let's change some of your reaction and let's look at how we can explore and reform and change and grow and heal together. I like to think that we're like that Japanese, or is it Chinese pottery where the porcelain breaks and they glue it all back
Is that
together with gold.
wabi-sabi or-
Yeah. But that's kind of what the opportunity presents in pain and hurt, is that you feel a bit broken and you feel wounded, but you can actually rebuild and you can be stronger because of it. And you
Yeah.
can teach other people the lessons you learnt on the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a lovely example. I think, if you're like role playing with somebody, one of your good friends, I'm like, I actually think it would be best if you talk directly back to the person who's just shouted at you. But let's do some role play to get you ready. And you might notice like, oh wow, like I'm feeling like if I do this, I'm going to get in trouble. Or I'm feeling if I do this, they're going to hate me now and I might be abandoned. Or I'm feeling my fight or flight come in and I just want to run away or punch them or something.
Yeah.
They're like, just like noticing what's happening while you're imagining it or role-playing it is really great. It's really good material to work through, and it can be very healing to work through all of that.
Yeah, and you may even save friendships this way with these tools. So there's actually a really cool resource that you had shared with me called the Creative Interventions Resources for Everyday
Creative
People.
Interventions Toolkit. It's a lovely free resource. It's very extensive, actually. It's like a whole book that you can download. But it's got lots and lots of strategies for approaching this stuff on a community-based level, like on a grassroots level and within interpersonal relationships.
And you also wrote something for 4ZZZ on that, hey?
Yeah, so my social work placement was actually here, and my task was to come up with a restorative organizational response to community problems. Which, I really love community problems. I think people think I'm crazy.
This is my special interest.
Yeah, it is. It's my special interest. I love especially like weird community problems. Anyway. Things for me to chew on. Unanswerable community problems. I love unanswerable community problems.
This seems really impossible. Let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, my brain can analyze it forever. That's great. But yeah, so I wrote a policy with, in tandem with some board members and the director, and it's a really good example of like a policy that you could have as a small volunteer-run organization that, if it's happening on an organizational level, and it doesn't fall into those sort of corporate responses that you often see, which can be very procedural and very sterile, and they're not really made to actually repair what's happened. They're normally just made to avoid legal liability, and those are two different goals. I care more about relationships. I care more about community. Yeah.
Two different locations for, do I care about community or do I care about saving face? Yeah. What's your intention? What are you aiming for there?
Yeah, totally. So you can find that policy on the governance page of the 4ZZZ website if you're interested. It's quite detailed. And
it's available.
If you're a community organizer who runs a small event or organization, it'd be great for you.
You can also Google Creative Interventions Toolkit. It's creative-interventions.org, and they've got, it's completely free download. It's also available in French, German, and now Spanish, this toolkit. So there's a bunch of resources out there to help get better at, restoring conflict and healing together as a community. Oh my gosh. This is a great episode.
Totally.
Whew.
I would also just add that you can reach out to people. I mean, you can reach out to Ez and get in touch with me if anything's happening. I'm happy to...
Trans Radio with a Z.
Finding, like, people who've got a really mature lens on conflict and harm and oppressive behaviours, and people who've done this work before, it's invaluable. That's what I've always done, is reach out to other people. Even if, then I'm not reaching out to them to say, come in and fix my problem for me, but I'm just like, can you give me some help with this? Like, what's your lens on this?
Yeah, and definitely. You should.
Yeah.
It's nice to have voices from other people to give you potential options and ideas, and you can choose to use them or not.
Totally.
That's really great.
Totally.
Well, let's come to the end of transmission for this week. Thank you so much, Marissa.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. Woo! We'll do another episode soon. We're always talking about interesting things, and we'll be continuing to talk about interesting things on future episodes. If you'd like to listen back, you can head over to the 4ZZZ website, 4ZZZ.org.au. You can listen back to all Triple Z shows, including this on demand. There's our digital as well. Gosh, we've got so much. So check that all out. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media at Trans Radio with a Z. I'll put all the resources that we talked about there today, as well as a podcast that goes up, which is also on the Community Radio Plus app. Anyway, I'm out of here. Bye!
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Transmission. See you next Tuesday, 9 to 10 a.m. on 4ZZZ.